Welcome to The Creative Influencer, where we discuss all things creative with an emphasis on influencers. The Creative Influencer is hosted by John Pfeiffer. John is an entertainment attorney in Santa Monica, California, who represents influencers and other creatives.
This is episode 7 of the 4th season of the Creative Influencer podcast. Today we interview Adi Kunalic. Adi is the co-founder of Opendorse, the platform used by professional athletes and now college athletes to measure engagement metrics and post sponsored content on social media. Opendorse makes it incredibly easy for brands and influencers to make deals. Adi shares his personal experience as a college athlete and kicker in the NFL and how that journey led him to create Opendorse. First, as a way to help his teammates calculate their worth on social media, and now as the leading platform for brand and endorsement deals for athlete influencers. I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did. I am joined today by Adi Kunalic. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John, for having me.
You are one of the co-founders of Opendorse, correct?
That is correct.
And I want to ask you about that. We're going to spend some time talking about that. But I think given who you are and what the company does, it's important to get a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
So originally, I was born in Bosnia, and my parents and my brother and I, we escaped and fled to Berlin, Germany in 94. So the Bosnian War, the Yugoslavian Civil War that happened around that time, the early 90s, we escaped. And so we were refugees in Berlin, Germany. So I grew up there. And when I moved to the States in 2000. So once the war had ended in Bosnia, our time in Berlin was up. And so Germany at the time actually so they would allow refugees from war-torn countries to come in. However, once the war ended, it was either, hey, you've got to go back. And thankfully, countries like the US were accepting, again, refugees and immigrants from countries that seemingly they were going to take a long time to recover. And so my parents and my brother and I, we moved to the States. We moved to Fort Worth, Texas in 2000. I grew up there. Then 2006, I believe, was actually when I got my offer from Nebraska, my junior year.
Well, I got to stop you there. An offer from Nebraska to do what?
To be a place kicker. So.
And how were you a soccer player, or how did that transition?
I was actually. That's part of the origin story. So I played soccer my entire life, and it was one of those things where I had gotten to high school, and a lot of my buddies were like, "Hey, man, you've got a cannon on you. Have you ever considered kicking footballs?" And it always seemed attractive to me, but I just never really dabbled with it. It's kind of like you play one sport, and that transition is tough, right? So, but when I got to my sophomore year of high school, my biology teacher, Coach Burnett, he was a coach on the football team. So I asked him one day, I go, "Hey, do you guys need a kicker by chance?" We're maybe like 2 or 3 weeks into my sophomore year, and he's like, not really. We've got a guy, our quarterback. He used to kick when he was he used to play soccer when he was younger, so he's kind of doing those duties. And then literally a week later, he comes to me and finds me at lunch, and he goes, "Hey, you still want to try out? You still want to be a kicker?" And he had to convince me because I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm interested anymore." Yeah. And so I went and kicked a couple of footballs for him, and we just kept backing up, and I kept hitting them, and he was like, "Okay, you've got the job." And so I was
backing up that makes the difference.
Yeah. It was just one after another, and back then, John, I didn't have any. My skills when it comes to kicking a football, which is completely different than kicking a soccer ball. I mean, you're just eyeing it, right? I think that soccer players, if you grew up playing soccer, the gift that you develop over time is that you can use your feet to get a ball into a certain area. and you can
Right.
be pretty dang precise with it. So kicking a football, like you by just eyeing it, you could pretty much get it through the goalpost. It's not that difficult. But then building the routine and then getting the technique down to do it the right way, that developed over the following couple of years. But it was super fun, and I'm super happy I did it.
And then now to where I interrupted you. You got an offer from the University of Nebraska to kick.
I did, yeah, and they were. So I had gotten another funny story, just kind of tied back to my background. Is my parents, obviously, we came to the U.S. with nothing, and my dad's a super hard worker, and he would emphasize, just reiterate, hey, education matters. This is, you don't want to be doing some of the jobs that I had to do, right, when you get older. And so he really pressed that upon my brother and I. But I got my first scholarship from the University of Connecticut. Okay, I'm a junior, and it's a full ride, right? That's what every D1 scholarship football is. They're full rides. So I called my dad, or actually I'd just gotten home, and I showed him the letter, and he's looking at it, and he goes, "What's this?" I go, "They're going to pay for me to go to school. If I go to school there, they will pay for my education." And he goes, "No." He goes, "There's no way." He goes, "In America, you have to work hard for everything you get. You're just kicking footballs. What are you talking about?" And it took him about 6 months to believe it. He didn't. He just was like, "No, I don't. I refuse to believe that." And so it tells you a little bit about just my parents and the level of hard work that they put into making sure that we are afforded the ability to come to the U.S. and have an opportunity to go to school and do things in life. So
Right. No, I grew up on a farm, and my dad was always waiting for me to get this law stuff out of my system so I could come back to the farm. So
yeah,
I get it.
he's like,
Uh,
"Hey, you go do your thing, but then you're gonna come back here, right?"
right, right. So while you were there, who was your roommate?
Blake Lawrence, actually, my first. Blake and I met during the spring game of 2007, right? So that was the first time we had connected, and he's like, "Hey, do you have a roommate for the summer?" And I said, "No." "You want a room together?" "Sure." And so we ended up spending that summer together. And what was crazy, and it ties back to what we ended up doing later in life, but he was the guy that he always had like little notepads around him, and he'd kind of draw and doodle things and kind of come up with crazy ideas and even concepts and products. And I would look at it and I'm like, "No, that's dumb. That's dumb. That's dumb." And then every now and then I'd be like, "That's a cool idea." I was like, that'd be super fun if we did something like that, right? So our friendship that developed that summer was more than to say we're teammates on a football team, but it was I think we started to really understand each other from a I don't want to say the word entrepreneurial, because that wasn't a thing. Like you're
Right.
just you're 18, but we definitely had a respect for each other's strengths even early on, and so I think that materialized over the coming years.
And just for the audience, he was a linebacker,
He was,
and
yep.
I've heard you say in interviews that you were the better football player.
I mean, you can look at the stats, right? And me and him, if you had him on right now, the we have people that have been on calls with us before together. He will have all the kicker jokes left and right, and then I always come back and I say, "Hey, but did you actually play? Right? Were you on the
I
field?"
heard that. I've heard you say that.
And so that's where the debate comes up. But no, he was a talented linebacker out of Kansas, and he had a promising career. And I think so. It's just when he was starting to really kind of get into a groove. 2008, he was starting, and he was having really good games, but he had kind of heading into the 2009 season, he had several concussions within a year long span. And after he had the final one, I think it was his third or fourth one, that was pretty serious. The coaching staff and the trainers, they recommended, "Hey, like this is life and death, like down the road stuff. You should consider maybe not playing football anymore." And he had to make a really tough decision. And thankfully he did that,
Yeah.
because I think concussions are one of those things where you wake up one day when you're 30 and you start to forget certain things, and you're like, oh my God, I should have taken care of myself when I could.
So now I will tell you that what you should do next time he makes the kicker joke, you just remind him that Justin Turner signed a $21 million guaranteed deal.
That's you're right about that, man. I mean,
And he doesn't get hit.
What's up?
And he doesn't get hit.
And he doesn't get hit. You're absolutely right. No, I mean, the kickers now, I mean, if you look at just the contract size in general in the NFL, just like with the NBA, I mean, it increases year over year. And I think people maybe at times have underestimated the value of a good kicker, but certainly now I think the games are so close and things end up coming down to a couple of points. Having a good kicker can change the game.
So I got myself off track, but I want to ask you about Opendorse. It was founded in 2012. Mm-hmm. According to LinkedIn, it is a social media publishing tool designed to help the world's most important people post with a single tap. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to unpack that, but tell me about I've heard your story about how you got here. How did you get to Opendorse in 2012?
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the LinkedIn bio, because we have evolved from some of our terminology or messaging around those things. But that is definitely one of the components that makes Opendorse special, and where a lot of the origins of Opendorse started. But where I'll take you back, John, is Blake and I, we started a company when we were seniors in college. It was the summer heading into our senior year, and it was called Her That, and it was a social media agency. Mm-hmm. So we that summer saw this opportunity that a lot of brands at the time didn't really know what social media was. This is 2010. So if you think about social media and all the traction and all the momentum it gets, it always starts out on the coasts. And then as it gets into the Midwest, it's always delayed, right? And businesses using social media as a tool to advance their marketing, to even have the word marketing after social media, that wasn't really a thing. It was just becoming a thing. So we saw that as an opportunity, and we decided to start this agency and really to serve a couple of local brands. And because we asked ourselves that summer, we always wanted to do something together. And we knew that football, like for me personally, football wasn't going to be there forever. And I certainly was going to try to make it to the pros, but a backup plan to start something with my best friend where we can just continue to have fun, continue to innovate, and continue to work and surround ourselves with people that we care about, like that'd be pretty cool, right? And so we started that company, and we were solving that problem of just finding businesses who didn't have the time, resources, or knowledge to do it themselves. And we did it. And so that grew into an agency that was about 25 employees, roughly 3 to 4 years later. And in that journey, we got exposed to working with larger brands, not just locally, but regionally, eventually nationally. But also in that journey, I ended up spending some time in the NFL myself. I signed a free agent deal with the Carolina Panthers. And all of our friends that we played with at Nebraska also went off to play in the NFL. Now, this is back in 2010. This was the good years of Nebraska. I'm not comparing it to the previous decade, but what I am saying is that year, 2010, at the end of the year, we had 11 NFL players or former Nebraska guys that were on NFL rosters from that class. So we were we had a pretty stacked group of talented guys that we had played with. So these guys are all in the NFL. They start calling us and they say, "Hey, Audie, Blake, you guys are the social media guys. There's these brands that are interested in working with us. I have no idea how to tell them how much I'm worth. How do I even grow my following?" And so what we started to do is we started to project and forecast some of these things and start kind of creating some of our own calculators of how we would be able to say, "Hey, here's how much you're worth." And all the while, we're also building campaigns where we're going out to the local car dealership or the local hospital who's already spending money on sports and saying, "Hey, how cool would it be if you had these former Husker players tweet about you and Facebook about you and Instagram about you?" And so they bought in on that. And so we were starting to do in the early days, these micro endorsements with athletes. But this is where Opendorse really came to be, is there was a problem, right? Which was, I would have a local company give me $5,000 so I can get out 3 or 4 posts with a said athlete. I would call that athlete. In this case, it was Niles Paul, who I played with, came in with my class. But I call Niles, I go, hey, Niles, I've got $5,000 for you, man. They're only looking for 4 posts. Are you in? And he would say, I'm in, but you got to talk to my agent first. Cool. Call up the agent. Agent goes, hey, this is great, but have you talked to Niles's lawyer? He needs to know anything that you guys are doing with contracts. Sure. Call the lawyer. Hey, this is great, but you should talk to his marketing rep because this agent doesn't know what he's talking about. Call the marketing rep. Marketing rep's like, hey, if Niles's cousin is okay, then we can do this. And so,
welcome to my life.
Yeah, I know, right? And so I hang up the phone. And I look at Blake, and at this time, we're in this, like, my office right now. That was our whole office, and
right.
He's sitting across, and he can tell I'm frustrated. I'm just like, what? He's like, what's going on? I'm like, dude, I have money for one of our friends, and I'm having to call all these people just for them to say okay, or for them to be bought in, or it's a nightmare. I was like, why is there nothing that exists that would expedite this process or streamline it, or just concentrate it into one area? And so that's when we had the idea for Opendorse. We didn't call it Opendorse at first, but we started building technology that would sort of be like an Amazon marketplace. You log in, you find the athlete, you could see what their followers, who they are, how many of them they have, how many of them are real, how many of them are fake, what their engagement rate is. And then we would kick an estimated price per post out. And then the brand could select those athletes. And this is the part of the technology that continued to stay on with Opendorse over the last decade, which was, we made it incredibly easy for athletes to accept deals and ensure that the brand, like that the post actually goes out. So the athlete's experience is simple with Opendorse. Brand comes to Opendorse, they find who they want to work with, they check out, they build a deal, they check out, they put in the post and the message. The athlete gets a text message. It says, hey, do you want to do, you have a new deal from Opendorse. Click right here. They click, it opens up a web app, and it tells them, Pepsi is going to pay you $500 to share this on Facebook at 2:00 on Friday. Click accept, click approve, green button. Click you want to pass, gray button. And if they click approve, that post would automatically go out on their account, on their channel, and then the brand would see on their dashboard that it went out, what the engagements were, what the clicks were, what the impressions were, and everybody was. And then the cool part was, we also added the approval cadence of, in the event that the marketing rep wants to be involved, the agent wants to be involved, they get to see the whole thing as it went through the process. And so we solved that problem, and we built this again initially under the Herd at umbrella, our agency, but we were like, this is a separate company. This is a software company, and we should turn this in, we should go raise some money and make this a thing. And so in 2012 is when we had the idea. 2013 is when we decided to go raise some money, and then really officially launched everything in 2014, and really got going, and the rest is, we'll talk about it.
Right. So as an athlete, if actually, let me get to the marketing part first. Do you reach out to the athletes, or do the athletes reach out to you?
Good question. So it's a little bit of both. What I will say though is, athletes, we don't ever reach out to athletes. It has always been on behalf of the brands. So in the early days, what really acted as a catalyst for us was, we were doing deals with just kind of our kind of closer network initially. And then the agents start to get a hang of this, or they were hearing about it, and they'd be like, hey, can I put my athletes on here so they can get more deals?
Well, my 10%.
Yeah, right. And so we're like, sure. And then the NFLPA called us, and they said, hey, we've been hearing.
Just for the listeners, The NFLPA is the Players Association.
The NFL Players Associations. That
Yeah.
is correct. And they called us and they're like, "Hey, we've been hearing that you've done some deals with some NFL players, and they like the process. Can you tell us a little bit more?" So we get on the phone with them, and we show them the process, and they're like, "This is great. Would you be open to partnering with us, because we have all these sponsors and all these licensees who have been really looking for a way to work with all 2,000 NFL players that are active on active rosters." And so we're like, sure. So we fly out to DC.
That's a trick question, right?
Yeah, I'm like, we're just 6 months into doing this, guys. We'll definitely do whatever you want. So we end up structuring a deal with them, and it was cool, because the other thing that it exposed us to, John, was that we ended up getting exposure to all the sports agencies, right? So Octagon, Wasserman, CAA, Lagardère, so we get exposure to all of them and their brands. And so they kind of start looking at us as a tool, as a utility, as a way for them to do more campaigns with their brands at scale. And so that's how we really started chipping away at that. So to your earlier question about, do we ask the athletes to join, or does that happen indirectly? They come to us. Well, through that exposure, the brands, if they're wanting to work with a certain set of athletes, we would then reach out to their agents and be like, "Hey, so-and-so brand is interested in working with your athletes. This is going to be the easiest money that you will ever make, and the easiest money that your athlete would ever make. And it will be compliant, and it will be tracked, and everybody will know." Because that was the other promise that we made to the NFLPA, was that they felt like there was the wild, wild west sometimes with agents. These deals would be done, and maybe cash is being paid to an agent, but they're only giving an athlete so much. Now, I don't know if that's true. You would assume or hope that that's not the case. I think that's maybe a little bit more outdated. But at the same time, there was everything's done through faxes and papers and spreadsheets. Like, what's going on here? So we're like, we will give you oversight. So not only will you know what athletes are getting deals, but you'll know how much money they're actually getting paid. And these athletes will never feel like they are being, used for whatever. Like, if they want a certain amount of dollars, let's give them those dollars, and let's make this whole process transparent. So all those functionalities around compliance and tracking was very much fundamental part of Opendorse in the early days, but we didn't know how much it's going to play in today's world and the importance of it. And it was a big part of it.
Yeah. So now let's flip it a second. What about a brand? If a brand wants to work with you, they just come to you and say, "Hey, we want to sign up, and we would like to work with A, B, C players."
That is correct. So for the most part, we have our product deals, which is there's a managed component to it, or there's a self-serve component to it. The managed component is managed service deals. Is EA Sports comes to us. They say, "Hey, we're looking to, we've got a new game coming out next week. We're looking to do a promotion around it. We would love a couple of NBA players, a couple of NFL players, and maybe some, MLS players." And so then Opendorse goes in, and we have data and insights, and we can look up and see, okay, what's your budget? Who do you want to reach? What markets? And we can kind of propose to them like, "Hey, here's all the lists of athletes that you can consider." They make their own decision on who they want to work with, but we're able to present them with raw data that they can look at, and they can see where will their money go the furthest, right? And what can they expect to happen if they were to work with these set athletes? And then that's all packaged up, and the coolest part about it is there's a lot of data companies out there, or even marketplaces out there. The beauty of Opendorse is the execution, right? Not only are you going to find the right athletes, but when you're executing the campaign, it's all done using technology. So never again do you have to worry that why didn't
they post?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why didn't Robert Griffin III post? Why did he send that Adidas post out at 12 o'clock at midnight on a Tuesday when it was supposed to be the weekend before? Like, what's going on here? And so that entire process was streamlined, and the agents also loved that part of it, because they're like, I'm getting text messages from a brand asking me to talk to my athlete. They have got a game tomorrow. I don't want to bother them. And we're like, this should be as easy as clicking a button.
Right.
So why don't you let us do it?
So this is like buffer on steroids.
That's a good way to put it. It's like a buffer for athletes and buffer on steroids. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about the brand can tell the engagement.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define it and how do you measure it?
As far as engagement goes?
Yes.
So we have our
the brands.
Yeah, as the brands go. So we track like the traditional social media metrics that are in there, and then we also have. So if a social post goes out, say somebody posts something on Twitter, we have all of the stuff from video views, from clicks if there was a link, and all those things. Now, what is cool about Opendorse is we have token access to these accounts, right? Because the athletes, to allow us to post on their channels pending their approval,
Right.
We have access to the actual raw data, so the true analytics and insights of a post. Whereas when you're scraping, or if you're using third-party tools to get insights on a post, you will never ever be able to get those accurate data points that the user themselves has. Okay, so we use that and we package that. The other piece that we have is we've sort of taken all of the deals that have ever been done through the Opendorse platform, and then we sort through all that, and then we have some of our own kind of proprietary formulas that we apply to that to give out different estimates. Okay, this athlete and this sport with this following, typically if they're sharing something, this is the engagement that we can predict, or these are the impressions that we can predict if they're talking about these types of brands and these types of verticals. So some of that stuff is, our analysts and their magic. But for the most part, we are able to get some of the most raw data on all the different platforms that are being posted on.
And in preparation for this, I went on your website and you can download a free report talking about engagement of, which I did.
Yeah, good.
Of the athlete versus the team versus the league.
Yep.
And it makes sense, but the athlete is far more engaging than a team or a league. What is the data that you found?
So the one metric that we constantly, it's in our like marketing speak now, but an athlete is 20 times more engaging than a team and league combined, right? And the reason is because people, they stop their scroll for faces, but they don't stop it for logos. So on any given day, a team, if it's sharing sponsored content, say, they might share 25 posts a day on their channel, where an athlete might share 6 posts a month, right? So the posts are actually a lot more concentrated, and they're a lot more relevant. They're a lot more engaging. And so what we know is that when you then put all that stuff together, you've got a lot more frequency going out on those team and league accounts, which rightfully so, it should be that way. And athletes are a little bit more selective with what they share. Now you have, I would say, the Juju Smith-Schusters, right? Which he is in his own kind of range, or like own stratosphere, in terms of he's the perfect athlete and marketer, right? Because the thing I try to explain to people all the time is like, Opendorse is for athletes, and it exists for athletes because it doesn't change an athlete's life. We enable them to use social media to grow their personal brands, but to continue to focus on the field, because 90%, if not more, of athletes, they're not really good marketers. They are followed because they are incredible on the field, and that's great. And I think that trend is maybe changing because more athletes are starting to really see what's good out there. They're starting to educate themselves. They're starting to really understand how to use social media and how to grow their personal brand, which is great. We love that. We champion that. But you only have about a fraction of athletes who are really good at being good marketers, which is a level of understanding of really knowing how to position yourself, what your audience craves, and also making sure that you are maintaining your status on the field and being an impactful player.
I mean,
right?
all they have to do is look to Michael Jordan.
I mean, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing is like, I make this joke. So we'll speak to student athletes all the time. And I always tell them the joke, like, I was like, guys, usually towards the end of the presentation, but I'm like, guys, you can do all the stuff that we're telling you that you can do, or all these tactics and how to's and strategies and content calendars. That's great. But the easiest way for you to grow your following is just performance on the field.
Yeah.
I was like, if you are good on the field and that's how you stand out, your followers will grow. And then I was like, because an athlete that's incredible on the field, they're remembered. Their brand sort of kind of comes out. It speaks for itself. And I was like, you can post a picture of a tomato and people will like it, right? And so I was like, so
If that tomatoes won 6 championships, you can.
exactly, yeah. Michael Jordan could literally start a Twitter account tomorrow, and he would probably have 1 million followers by Friday, or,
Yeah.
by the weekend. So
I want to shift gears a second. You're talking about talking to students and athletes. There are 2 emerging segments. One is huge and one is not as big, but it's still kind of surprising. And we'll do the smaller one first, which is high schools. Why are high schools buying into this? And why are high school athletes buying into this?
I think it is a trend. I think social media has a huge impact on it, right? So there's so much exposure to now to video footage and to recruiting and to branding and to building audiences. Like some of the recruits that are coming into college now, I mean, compared to when I was coming to Nebraska back in 2007, there was MySpace, and Facebook had just kind of become a thing. It was still, they still had the invite. Somebody from college had to invite you to be in the network, right? And so we didn't have Instagram. Twitter still hadn't really popped up. It came on the scene, I would say, around 2008, 2009, really around the Midwest, I guess, if you want to say it that way. But so there wasn't that much exposure. You basically played football or basketball, whatever. You would record yourself. You would take that VHS, right? And then you would freaking do a copy of that, and you would mail it in, and you would hope that people see you.
Somebody looked at it.
That a coach somewhere in Montana or Seattle or Nebraska or Clemson, that they see you and that they want to give you an offer. Now the game is completely different now. You can get recruited now, right? There's things like Huddle, which is a company here down the street, also startup, started probably 4 years before her dad and Opendorse did. But they provide video software to every high school in the US and now globally to sports. And the problem that they solved was that those VHSs that I was talking about, that's how coaches used to exchange film. Is that night they would take that VHS film, they put it in, they'd cut it up, they would travel across town, exchange videos, and it was kind of a code. Like, I'm gonna give you my footage and you give me yours, and then we'll play you next weekend, right? And so that was a lot of time that they had to commit to doing that after a game. Well, what Huddle did is everything was put into the cloud, right? And so the other thing that they did is they completely revolutionized recruiting, because now you don't have to send film in anymore. It's just like, hey, check out my Huddle profile. Right. And the reason I bring them up is because that access to footage tied with your personal brand, now literally you can, if you're 15 years old, and you're playing football down in Florida somewhere, and you start a Twitter account, you can have a link in your bio with the Huddle link, and it says, "This is all my play." You can literally pin your career best 5 catches. So if a scout or a coach that's recruiting lands on your page, they see you, they're like, "Oh, that's a interesting player. You know, maybe we haven't even come across him, right?" So that exposure, I think it kind of, again, going back to what we were saying before the show, but it accelerated things. And so I just think that it's a completely different ballgame now. The personal brand matters to athletes. They're also a lot savvier, right? Like, so we've got this entire generation. We have new social media channels like TikTok coming out. There's so much creativity that's being poured into these channels by kids that are 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. So I think that they're growing up in a world where everything is digital. And I think that's just putting that kind of everything front and center for people to see.
And then the big change that's coming and coming fast is the name, image, and likeness. It first started with legislation in California, and Nebraska was pretty close to follow. But they passed laws saying that student athletes could use their name, image, and likeness to make money, which the NCAA, as you're well aware, has a rule that says you can't. Because the NCAA wrote Gavin Newsom before he signed the legislation saying this is unconstitutional, we're going to fight it. But then a week later, did an about face. They then did in April, they released a 32-page report. And there is a vote set for next month to allow college athletes to use their name, image, and likeness to make money. First, before I get into that, do you know the date of the vote?
I don't know the exact date. I've been pretty heads down on. There's I would say, like, in our world, there is the vote, there's NIL and whatnot, and there's certain things that are kind of out of our control.
Yeah.
And we have these loose dates in our head, but I'm like, I gotta do business as usual. And so whatever is the outcome of that vote, we'll deal with it when we get there.
Because I can't find the date. It's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think there's got to be one, but to your point, it's next month. I know it's next month. I know because it is it's been building up to this, and I also know it's next month because they're set to go live in August. Right? They're going to need actual technology to allow to do this, all the stuff that's going to happen in a compliant way. So we're kind of running against like a timeline, if you will.
And so you have developed programs for universities in anticipation of this.
That is correct.
And one of them was University of Nebraska, one of the very first, I believe.
It was. They were the first ones. Yes.
How interesting that pitch was made to them first.
It is. I will say. So the Ready Now program, it was the first of a kind NIL program in the UN in history, right? Because this wasn't a thing. If you just date back all the way to last summer, so 2019 is when I think the NCAA started to have discussions about potentially building up a working group and asking sort of professionals in the space of athletes and endorsements and all the stuff around the name, image, and likeness, if you want to look at it on the pro space, right? And so those kind of inklings started. We were asked to submit what we believed could be a potential future model. And so some of that stuff, our conversations started all the way back then. Now, what was cool for Opendorse is that we've been building this company in anticipation of this happening, but we didn't know if it was going to happen in time for us to actually do something about it, right? Because when you start a company as an entrepreneur, I always tell people, like, it's the only career that doesn't have a timeline, there's no end date, and there's no how to. Everything is kind of up in the air, right? And so, but it was on our side, right? So once we started hearing that this was a potential change that was coming and that there was a desire to move to a structure where athletes could get compensated, we're like, oh my God, our entire business was built for
on
this
that model.
And so what we did is we looked at, okay, what would be the easiest way for us to take all of the institutional knowledge that we have built over the last 8 years, all of our technology, all of our experiences, in trying to build a marketplace back in 2012, and then iterating on that, and then building a very strong social media publishing tool, and then a content sharing, all these things. And like, if we had to rebuild it, what would it look like? And so Nebraska actually came to us in December of 2019, and they're like, hey, they're hearing things about the NCAA starting to kind of go down this path. They're establishing a working group, and what's cool about it is they're across the street. They come over here, and the cool thing about it was they were like, hey, what can we do together? Because we want to be first, and we want to invest. We want to show athletes that we're going to invest in their personal brands, because they'd already been doing it through using Opendorse by making content available to them, sending that. Those things were already happening, but they're like, we want to know as much as we can about what you know, and we want to build really cool program, and hopefully we can do it together. That helps us educate. It helps us provide information. It helps us coach. It helps these athletes really understand what their personal brands mean and what their image and likeness is valued at. And so that's where kind of a lot of the stuff was born. And then in March is when we announced the partnership.
Yeah, and since then, at least publicly, I've seen announcements that K-State, TCU, BYU, Louisville, Fresno State, Wake Forest, and I'm sure there's a lot more, but these are the ones that have publicly announced
Yes.
that have signed up with you guys.
Yep. We have, so far, we've publicly announced, I'm looking at the list. We have 15 ready partners who have come onto the program. I don't know how many we've publicly announced. I would say maybe about half or more of those have been publicly announced. Some are going to be doing it in the coming weeks and months.
I went pretty deep into Google to see how many I could find.
I appreciate you doing that, because John, it's a big deal. Because like, here's what I tell people all the time is, in recruiting, you need an edge. Okay. And a school, if you're a high school athlete and you're like, okay, I've got all these offers, and one of the schools has a program that's going to invest in you, helping you with name, image, and likeness. They have a partner who understands that ecosystem. So it's like, okay, if I go there, I will benefit from understanding how to do these things, how to grow my personal brand. And then hopefully when everything is passed and everything is in action and active, I'm able to make some money. And so all the schools, and it doesn't have to be with Opendorse. There's other programs who are doing things independently. They're hiring different staff, people with different experiences. And we're like, do it, because the market needs to know that this is a real thing. And then, as with anything that happens where there's a lot of buzz and a lot of momentum, over the last couple of months, there's been new entrants, right? And people are trying to jump into this world. And we personally like it because it's creating the market, right? If there's more
awareness, yeah.
And I think the thing that people sometimes maybe underestimate is how much you have to understand about marketplaces, about agents, about professional athletes. It's not just jumping into it and thinking that athletes are going to trust you and whatnot, because I'm sure you've been working, you told me you work with a lot of influencers and you represent them, and that it's the same thing. It's the number one thing in that world, as with athletes, is trust. And agents, it takes a long time to get their trust. Pro athletes, it takes a very long time to get their trust. The associations, it takes a very long time to get their trust. That's why PGA Tour, NFLPA, MLBPA, NBPA, all these large organizations, Team USA, USOPC, like all these large organizations have put their trust in Opendorse. So we're very protective of that. And we have been doing our best to just, again, package it all and let the market know, like, hey, we're here for this. We're going to protect the athletes. We're going to give you a compliant and an easy way to work with them. And hopefully, by being able to push this, we'll be able to grow the market together.
Well, I tell my clients that you are a startup.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a startup company, and it's been this way for, since the start of time, that people have to know you, like you, and trust you before they want to do business with you.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you to, as we head into the final stretch, put on your look into your crystal ball. And where will this be as it relates to student athletes? Where will this be in 3 years? Where will this be in 5 years?
That's a great question. This is here's where it's going to go. I think adoption in 2021, it will obviously happen in the later part of the year, and maybe we won't have as many athletes immediately signing up, but I think over the next couple of years, it will start to just increase. And I think that I don't have exact numbers to give you, but I think people are also underestimating how many local sponsors in college sports
Want to do this.
love to work with a volleyball player or with a basketball player, or they would love that. They would love to have them at an autograph signing or to have them say something, because there's a lot of value in that, and there's a cool factor to it. And they're frankly tired of spending money on radio and signage.
Right.
Well, okay, cool. Like people have seen that. And so there's going to be, I think once those first couple of months are done and the kinks are starting to be worked out, this is going to explode. Now, the big belief that we have and we share as a company is that what's going to happen is, I think that the professional ranks are eventually going to emulate and do more of what the NCAA and student athletes are doing. And here's why. Because from day one, this endorsement space or ecosystem will be built on technology and transparency and streamlining. And so you don't really have any of those bad actors. They can't get in. Okay. So I think the endorsement industry has really suffered from that, is that in order for you to change it, it would just require a heavy lift. And you're talking about trying to change habits of agents and marketing reps. There's no way. Whereas this is starting from technology from day one. And yes, Trevor Lawrence and some of the bigger name athletes, are they going to have agent representation? Sure. But what's going to happen is, I think that over the next 3 to 5 years, the professional ecosystem will look at this and say, hey, how can we be more, how can we have a similar setup to the way that this is set up? Because it allows for transparency. It allows for everyone to kind of stay on top of each other. It will also provide way more access, right? So I think if there's anything we learn, is the cameo effect, right? A year ago, if you're a talent rep at CAA or Wasserman, you might be laughing at Cameo. You're like, oh, what brands are gonna spend money with these? Or like, how many fans are gonna do this? But a year later, you're like, holy shit, right? There is a lot of fans. The fan to creator or influencer connection, they've really exposed it. They said that there's fans that are willing to spend $50, $100 to get a shout out. Now imagine if you apply that to the entire world, like it could really blow up. So I think that there's going to be a lot more transparency. Again, there's going to be a lot more compliance. There's going to be a lot more technology. And I think that whatever is done with the NCAA and all their tech vendors and partners will be something that the professional ranks will try to do as well.
So my last question is, where can people find you?
Where can people find Opendorse? We are Opendorse on Twitter. Just search Opendorse, Opendorse, like open endorsement, right? So you can find us on Twitter, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Instagram, and our website too is opendorse.com. If you give us a follow, we put some pretty cool stuff out. Our social media team is really good at what they do, and something that Blake and I are very proud of is the brand matters to us. It matters to us a lot. We can be pretty picky about some of the stuff, but I think that again, the next 12 months, the next 2 years, 3 years are going to be super fun for athletes, for student athletes, for incoming to college athletes, and will be pretty cool to see what happens.
So thank you very much.
That's it for this time. If you enjoyed our podcast, please write a review on iTunes and tell your friends to subscribe. If you have any questions about influencers or suggestions for future episodes, email them to John at Pfeiffer@pfeifferlaw.com. Thank you for listening.